Welcome to 3D View, one conversation, three different perspectives. I'm Lamondre Pugh.
I am David Perez.
And I'm Richard Strice. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. So this week we wanted to shift a little bit away from the political conversations that we've been having because we wanted to talk about something that's very close to us, something that we've been working on for a while as a company in Rue Global, and that is the future of work, and especially how it has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic across the world. As everyone in the world, I think, knows, the COVID-19 pandemic was a big thing that forced a lot of businesses to close and go either work from home or completely close. And that transition to a completely digital world was not something that affected only businesses. It affected governments, it affected education, it affected everyone. Everyone had to transition to a digital world. And what that created was basically a leap forward into something that we were already expecting, which was the future of work. That fourth industrial revolution that we were expecting would come with the advent of technology, everything happening online. I know it has become some sort of a meme that everyone has so many Zoom meetings now that they simply cannot deal with any more Zoom meetings. But the fact is that that was something that we were expecting would happen with the fourth industrial revolution. So COVID-19 basically pushed us all into the future that we were already preparing for, but maybe most of us, some of us, were not as prepared as others. And the future of work has been announced by many people around the world for a long time. They've been saying, we're going to start doing things digital. The advent of AI is going to change how we do things. Jobs are going to start disappearing. According to the World Economic Forum, 47% of jobs are at high risk of disappearing with the future of work. And all of those statistics have been created sort of to create awareness. They are scary, but they are not created to scare people. They are created to create awareness and tell people, let's prepare for what's coming. The thing is that COVID-19 has pushed it forward, has forced everyone into something that was completely unknown. And we need to start figuring out how to do things right now, to start walking towards that future and make it as inclusive and as good as it can be for everyone. So that's the conversation that we want to have today. We want to talk about what the future of work is, what we think might happen, and what is changing with the future of work. So guys, I want to hear your initial thoughts on the future of work, what you think about when you talk about the future of work.
Well, it's something that, and you alluded to this, there's the future of work pre-COVID and future of work post-COVID. And I think those conversations, although are related, have definitely matured and shifted in a way that they aren't necessarily going to go back to that pre-COVID a level of conversation. And so I think that's a good thing ultimately, because one of the things that COVID has done in regard to certainly future of work is it has forced both on the employee and on the employer side higher levels of integration and activity in regard to using tools that now have become commonplace, that may have been only more common and more aware of techno specialists or techno geeks that were following trends in technology and so forth, where now they're very much commonplace for people. And so there's a level of comfort just strictly from that, which helps spread that across a generational divide. You'll have more senior partners and more senior higher level individuals in a work environment that are now using these tools on a day-to-day basis, where previously they weren't, where maybe newer and younger employees were far more advanced in regard to their level of utilization. And so there's that. Also from the employer side, data collection points become far more critical, and in regard to, they have digital clocking in and clocking out. Some people have keyboard counters to monitor activities, and things like this. So and some people say, well, that sounds like Big Brother. Well, okay, yeah, sure. But from the employer side, that's data collection. Those are data points that now they can able to monitor an employee base and provide either tools as a result of that data that help increase productivity and make it easier for the employee to do their job. So it's not always just negative data. Just because data is being collected, it doesn't mean it's automatically negative or should be looked at that. Many times it's for the greater good of not only the organization, but the employees and so forth. So anyway, there's a lot to unpack, and we'll get into all this. But I mean, I think that understanding that there's a pre-COVID and a post-COVID reality to this is important.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, Richard, on that. And one of the things that really stands out to me in this is we're calling it the future of work, but I almost look at it like, and this is probably a horrible analogy to make for this, but I look at it as a mother eagle pushing her eaglets out of the nest. It just so happens that the mother was a horrible virus that was airborne and killed, a bunch of people. But still, yet the infrastructure that we're building this on had already existed. It had been there. In fact, it had gotten to where we were getting pretty good with it. It just wasn't being used on a widespread basis. Mm-hmm. But now, because of the push out of the nest, everybody all of a sudden has started to really embrace this kind of technology. And of course, there are a lot of fears. There are a lot of changes that are happening as a result of, particularly and specifically what I'm talking about right now are like the platforms like the meeting platforms. I'm not going to necessarily say one in particular, but the meeting platforms that are out there that people are really starting to, really get the hang of them pretty much. But the thing is, they've been here for a while and we just refuse to use them. And what also is interesting is now people are being forced to start thinking differently, to start looking at things differently. There were organizations and companies that both of you guys know who said, we can't do that. That's not something we could do, until it became something you had to do in order to survive. And now all of a sudden we can do it. We may have some learning hiccups, but we can do it. So I see not only just a shift in terms of technology, not only a shift in terms of skill set, but also the culture of how we view work and work environments and what it means to connect with people. What does it mean to collaborate with people? And how are we productive in getting this done? So I see that as a part of that free fall before we begin to kind of catch wind with our wings. But I think we are. And I think that it's a scary, but it's a very exciting time. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity that has been revealed that otherwise we would have not seen before.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. We've been pushed forward into something that was already happening in some companies. We can say that Rue Global Impact has been working from home for more than 4 years now. And we've been completely digital, giving even more pronounced by the fact that I am in Costa Rica and you guys are in 2 different states in the United States, right? We have been doing that for 4 years. And still 3 years ago in 2017, Raja, Christensen, and Sala published an article, and they said the changes that the digital technology is introducing in the price of capital versus labor, the costs of transacting, the economies of scale, and the speed of innovation bring significant effect in 3 dimensions: the quantity, the quality, and the distribution of jobs. We already knew 3 years ago that this was going to happen. Yeah. What happened with COVID was that it happened everywhere at the same time, and there was no other option. You either adapted or you failed as a business. So people had to adapt, and they had to start using new technologies, and they had to start using AI to manage those data points that Richard was talking about. And they started doing things. But another thing that started happening is that we saw even more people take advantage of those things that we know as the future of work. For example, the gig economy started popping everywhere in the world. I know that we have been talking about the gig economy for a while. A lot of people have been involved in the gig economy, doing different gigs for different companies and creating even a better reality for themselves than they could have if they were employees of only one company. But with COVID, people had to do it. There was no choice, right? If my company closes, I need to find work. So they started doing everything they could. Workforces were decentralized, right?
Yeah.
As well. Everyone was working from home. So now you can have people working from anywhere in the world. And one thing that I find is one of the most important ones is that the motivation to work changed.
Absolutely. People
with COVID were forced to realize what's important and what is not important. And there's a phrase by a Spanish author. He's fantastic. His name is Victor Coopers. And he says, the most important thing in life is that the most important thing is the most important thing. You need to find what's important to you and work for that and make the most important things the most important. So let's talk about these three things: the gig economy, the decentralized workforce, and the motivation to work changing. And let's address those three different topics that are part of the conversation of the future of work, but that we were forced into.
Interesting point about the decentralized. I'm going to address that, the second item you did first, because one of the interesting things is cause and effect of that. As a result of everyone becoming decentralized, or everyone was working from home now, and for large corporations, the 100, 500 plus 1,000 employee base, or the large mega companies have thousands of employees. This becomes problematic because initially, because for many of these work and tasks groups within each one of these different corporations, they relied on that sort of day-to-day interaction, being able to pop into each other's office and being able to have a strong flow of communication. And as a result of being everyone working from home now, and you didn't necessarily have that, what ended up happening is not only just the proliferation, but also the accelerated use of tools that allowed that level of communication still to happen on a moment-to-moment instance. So instead of popping into somebody's office, you would pop up on their screen with a text message or what have you in group environments, digital group environments. And so the interesting side effect of that is that companies that had very poor aspects of that at an organic level in their company actually had improved output because people adapted to using those tools in a much easier way. Everyone just fell used to doing that because they're staring at their screen, they're sitting in front of their computer, and it became easier now for them to be able to do that where that may not have existed organically in the physical world in their office space. And so you'd get tighter collaborative efforts as a result of that. And so there's sort of this interesting juxtaposition of that, where you had, as a result of the isolation, and you ended up getting better collaboration from some organizations as a result of that. So and that again, based on platforms that were already existing, but no one was necessarily using to the extent that they are now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lamondre.
No, I was going to kind of come from multiple perspectives, but the whole rise of the gig economy, I think one of the things that has been amazing, particularly for people with disabilities and people who've been typically marginalized in terms of the workforce, is the gig economy has allowed for entrepreneurs to really step up. And so it's a situation, okay, so perhaps I can't get hired, or I have not been able to be hired at that particular company or organization, but I can still supply whatever service or goods that I create, that I provide to a number of people, because now people are looking for it. Now, that means that causes us to have to develop some other skill sets in terms of managing time and managing resources and figuring out how to properly market it. But the reality is there is another avenue. I don't have to just wait for a company to come along and say, yes, we'll take you on. I can actually go out there and put it out myself. And now what you'll find is a lot of organizations are now actually scouting for those talents based on the work that they've been producing as as members of this gig economy. So I think that the opportunity has always been there, but now it's open to more people. Now it's open to more people to really become a part and earn a living doing things that they're skilled and talented enough to do. Now, the other thing that I wanted to address in this was about the motivation to work. Now, when we think about the motivation to work, I think that one of the things that we have to recognize is that this future of work issue is causing so many people to have to be reskilled, to have to be retrained, to have to look at what else is it that I can do, because not only is it interacting and interfacing with new technologies, but as you said, 47% of those jobs may disappear, might not be here anymore. So what are people going to do? So now you're talking about, and this is just an example of it, where people who once were coal miners are now being trained on how to code. Because obviously, the coal industry, bye-bye. Even though it was said it was coming back, didn't happen. But nonetheless, so now people are being retrained to do this. And this is something that has to happen across the board. And it's amazing. It's amazing the training opportunities that are available for people now to be retrained, to be to learn new skills and a new skill set. Then the third thing that I want to talk about is the decentralization of work. And, Richard, you so eloquently put out, what that could mean and what that could look like. But here's something that I think we have to address. Even with this whole new future of work and the technologies and all those kinds of things, there are still a large number of people who will not have access because they don't have access to high speed internet connections. They don't have access to the technology in itself. So what happens is those people could easily be left behind. And here's the thing: typically, these are the communities that are already left behind in the current economy, in the current situation in terms of work. And so we're talking about even widening that gap between those who are participating in it and those who are not. And it's not because of a lack of motivation. It's not because of a lack of desire. It's not even because of a lack of, I don't want to be retrained. It is simply because the infrastructure is not there that will allow that person to have access to the system. And so, we really have to look at the factors that play in because right now it is an amazing opportunity for people who traditionally have been locked out to actually participate. But in order to do that, they've got to have access. They've got to have access to the infrastructure. They have to have access to the technology. So I think that so it's imperative that we take a look at that when we consider the decentralization of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can add some statistics to what you're saying. Mar in 2018 said over the last 2 years ago, so that would be 2016 and 2017, 90% of the data in the world was generated. So the opportunities for learning are endless.
Wait a minute. Say that. Please repeat that statistic.
Over the last 2 years alone, 90% of the data in the world was generated. That was 2016 and 2017.
That's jaw dropping, man.
So you can imagine the amount of data we have generated since then and up until now. The opportunities for lifelong learning are out there for everyone that has access. Everyone that has access to those opportunities for lifelong learning can start to get into this fourth industrial revolution in full form. Because getting into the gig economy, having to wear different hats for different companies, of course, implies you have different skills to do for different companies. Being part of a decentralized workforce implies you have access to the internet. Lifelong learning, which is something that people are looking for now, you need internet access to do it. Technology augmenting human work is also another of the big topics in the future of work. And to be able to understand technology, you need to be able to access technology. All of those different things put together translate into one big thing, which is better job quality for most people. Because we know that jobs are getting better, less demanding, less bad for people. But the people that have access are the ones that already had access. So that leads us to the bigger conversation about the future of work. And that is that the world is changing. We know that. We've been seeing that for a while. But it's not equal. It's not changing at the same rate for everyone. So, for example, the community of people with disabilities has always been left out of the business world. They have not been included. We need to start making changes now so that future of work that we're looking at is inclusive for everyone. And what are those changes? What can we do to start making the world more inclusive in the future of work? What do you guys think?
Well, I absolutely. And there certainly are organizations out there that are doing amazing work in desperately trying to do that, especially for many of the developing countries and countries that have depressed economies and so forth. For example, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation is certainly one of the global leaders in being able to create connectivity to many areas of many of the countries within the continent of Africa, but also in India and parts of Asia as well. Huawei Technologies Corporation is another organization that is actively providing mobile communication devices for regions that they can come in to provide access to the internet, because it's so critical for individuals all over the world, all peoples, to have, no matter how remote, to have access to this information, to have access to the portal that gives them connectivity to be able to connect and learn and read and nurture their skill sets. I often think, and I may have brought it up in a previous episode, where we don't know where the next Mozart is living, or where the next Einstein or Stephen Hawking is living, and just because they don't have access to modern or standardized communication, they're not able to demonstrate their skill sets or abilities, even though their mind is more than capable enough. And so that is a crime to not only just themselves, but to society in general, that loses the ability and insight of those individuals that are lost otherwise. So there's no question that the digital divide, just an event like COVID-19 has expanded and exacerbated the digital divide, and the disparity that exists between regions. And we don't have to look very far. Here in the U.S., we don't have to look to foreign countries for this. We have many areas here in the U.S. that fall exactly in those the remote rural country cities and towns that are all over the U.S. Suffer this plight as well, of not having connectivity. So it's certainly a global issue. but one that we in the U.S. here haven't really chosen to really come to grips with ourselves. But it is certainly important.
Yeah. I believe that every society should want all of its citizens to be well educated and earning a living wage to where they can support themselves and their families. And I believe that the government plays a role in that. I believe that government industry and communities have to come together to bridge those gaps. Because here's the thing, and statistically, you all know that this is true. Organizations that focus on diversity and inclusion typically fare better economically and in terms of longevity than those who don't place that as a higher priority. So, my thinking is, as a society, government would say, you know what? We really need to work to make certain that all of our citizens have access. This just as a not even as a hey, this is a nice thing to do, but as a right. Because here's the thing,
yeah.
as a fundamental right, absolutely. Because the thing that I recognize is that because we, as David just gave the statistics about how much data has been produced within the past 2 years, when you think about that, if you're outside of that loop, you're missing out on everything in terms of how society is progressing and how it's moving forward. Now, if you wanted to go off the grid, get you a couple of cows, chickens, and plant a farm and just live your life that way, dig a well, that's fine. You can do that. But that's not realistic for 99.9% of the population. There's probably 0.1% of the population that can do that, and God bless them. But the truth is, the rest of society marches on. And if you don't make certain that folks have this kind of access, if the government does not make certain that they're working with industry and industry makes certain that they're working with community, if that doesn't happen, unfortunately, government, industry, and society is going to have to deal and work with those issues on a much bigger scale than necessary. Because the thing that we find is when people don't have gainful employment opportunities, when people are poorly educated, what you tend to see is an increase of crime. What you tend to see is an increase of the things that are not necessarily favorable for a community. So it seems to me like it would be a no-brainer for us to say, we need to heavily invest in this, and we need to make certain that all of our citizens have access to it. So I believe that that's one of the things that we have to do is really look at the communications and the connections and the efforts that government, industry, and communities are putting into this and work together to make it happen, as opposed to villainizing any section of that.
Yeah, no, we don't want to villainize anyone. We know that what we want to do is work now, start working now, because we cannot wait to see what happens. And if we are able to do things a different way, we know that the only way forward is inclusion. The only way you can help disenfranchised populations stop being disenfranchised is by including them in the conversations. And that inclusion is only going to come by a lot of joint efforts from the private sector and the public sector. I wanted to add another statistic because it's just very important for people to know the effect that including people has in the economy. Mm-hmm. Accenture in 2018 published a report, and in that report they state that the USA GDP could get a $25 billion boost if only 1% of the people with disability community was introduced into the workforce. That's 1%.
Wow.
So imagine what we could do if that was 100%. The amount of money that would be moving around, it's, of course, on the trillions of dollars. And everyone would benefit. Companies would benefit. Individuals would benefit. Everyone would start having better quality of life. Everyone would start having better quality jobs, because we are, as Richard was saying, introducing people that have been left out into our joint efforts as society to become better. And those people are going to bring better ideas, better things for everyone. Inclusion is never a bad thing. And that's something that I feel like people need repeated more and more. They tend to forget that inclusion is never a bad thing. There's no way that it can turn bad on you. The only way is if you do it wrong.
Right.
If you start including but excluding others.
Right.
Real inclusion, making everyone more equal, is always going to yield benefits in the long and short term. That's clear. Companies have noticed it. Champions on disability inclusion, companies that have been labeled as champions by Accenture, average 28% higher revenue than their competitors in the same segment in the industry. That's 28%. And we know for a fact that they're not doing enough. But those are the first steps towards inclusion. They are having happier employees, less turnover rates. They're simply making their companies better by just starting the walk towards inclusion. And we know that if we as society started that walk towards inclusion, thinking about the future of work, we can have a fully inclusive future of work where everyone that wants to work can work and have impact in society. And that impact translates into impact into everyone's lives around them.
Yeah, absolutely. Innovation sits squarely on the shoulders of inclusion. And innovation and invention, you have to have an inclusive collaborative environment in order for those things to proceed. Otherwise, you have stagnation. And so the only way you can have that constant flow of fresh new ideas is by becoming more inclusive. So that your ideal pool doesn't become stagnant. And I think that's the proof, sort of, into the statistics that David, that you mentioned, is why it's so important to have and create inclusive environments. And that doesn't, in its totality, inclusiveness for all peoples of all abilities, because it's that through that collaborative nature. And you mentioned something else that is just so profoundly important. I think many people think that, oh, well, the government's the one that's got to step up and provide infrastructure and all that. I think that in the first and sort of second industrial revolution here, that we went through, especially like in the turn of the century, that wasn't really the case, right? It was the private sector that launched us. If you look at Edison and Carnegie and all of that, these were private individuals that built amassed an amazing amount of wealth based on that. But that it's an important lesson that we can't necessarily rely on the government because we're too big to do this level of scale of change. There needs to be collaborative, corroborative partners, both on the private, at the scale of private and the public sector, because you have to have, because of how complex our society is, you have to have that level of some governmental regulation and so forth, so that things can be controlled and we don't end up with monopolies like we had back in those days. But still, the innovation is really going to come from the private sector. Working in collaboration and corroboration with the governments to allow it to expand. So I think that's not a trivial point to this, is that not one or another group, again, it goes to that inclusive. This is an all-inclusive item where all parties need to come to the table and support it.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I agree that it has to be collaborative, because here's the thing, that, as you said, a lot of monopolies were made during that time because there were a lot of people who contributed to those revolutions and to those even to those evolutions. But the truth is, many of those people were still left out. Many of those people did not get the credit, did not get the money, did not get the economic boost, because these titans of industry pretty much hoarded it for themselves.
Well, and lack of regulation, right?
While it did change society, it also had that big gap again. And this is why I say it's so important that it's a collaborative effort, because the thing that we do recognize is industry unchecked leads to greed running amok. And we recognize that. So you have to have those collaborative efforts. You have to have those collaborative arms that come into play. And I also say that, we certainly do applaud those who are making a difference, who are really doing the best that they know of right now to include. But we cannot make inclusion a club. We cannot make inclusion a clique, because what is by virtue of the concept of inclusion, that means that it's not. Because if it's a club, if it's a clique, that means you have excluded others. And the truth is, we want to open the doors. And the way that I even approach business is, you know what? You can do it because it's the right thing to do. If that's what you want, because you feel like it's the right thing to do. But make sure your motivation in doing it the right thing to do is somewhat selfish. Because David just recited the statistics that said that companies that are included, they do 28% better. They see productivity go up. They see vast improvements. So think of it in terms of, you know what? This is good for my business. It makes business sense for me to be more inclusive, to have a concept. I don't mean just checking the box inclusion. I don't mean just, we got one of them.
Right.
No. I'm talking about where inclusion is embraced, it's valued, and it's leveraged. I think that's important, that we recognize that there is a handsome benefit for inclusion with that. And so I appreciate you, David, for sharing those statistics, because when you hear those numbers, again, it is jaw-dropping to hear how things improve. And I think that the future of work for me screams inclusion. That's what it's about for me, inclusion. Because here's the thing, technologies will change, the means of which we do things will change, but that inclusion piece, I think, is going to be the constant that is necessary for this thing to really work.
Well, and when you say inclusion, and I want to preface this because when I use the term inclusion, I also mean diverse. So this is not just, we're talking inclusion in its holistic sense, meaning all peoples, diversity, et cetera. We're not saying inclusion, just inclusion of persons with disabilities or inclusion of this group or that group. We mean society in its totality, being inclusive of all peoples, of all abilities, because it's through that complex commingling that we create only the best thoughts and ideas that can come from true collaboration.
Absolutely. Inclusion is not a club.
You're right.
Inclusion can't be a club.
Can't be a club, yeah.
And we know that. We know that inclusion needs to become a given. And COVID-19 pandemic has created that sort of scenario where everything is possible. Even though it has been very bleak, I share the sentiment that the future is bright and there is cause for hope. So we have a lot to do. But if we want the future of work to be better than what we have now, we need to start working now to make it inclusive. And we need to start working, as you guys were saying, together. Companies, governments, every single one of us from our corner of the world needs to start doing the right things to make the world as inclusive as possible. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening.
We are out of the nest. Let's fly.
Thanks for joining us this week on 3D View. Make sure to visit our website, ruglobal.com/3dview. That's ruhglobal.com/3dvu, where you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts or join our YouTube channel so you will never miss a show. While you're at it, if you find value in the show, we appreciate it if you would leave a like or comment, or simply tell a friend about the show. That would really help us a lot too. If you would like to join our conversations, you can join our Facebook community, 3D View, 3 Perspectives, 1 Conversation.